Rick Grenell's joining us now. I'm so glad it's perfect timing in the broadcast to get Rick with us. He is our Senior Advisor for National Security and Foreign Policy. And I remind you, his final position within the Trump administration was the Acting Director of National Intelligence, overseeing all of the U.S. intelligence agencies. And Rick, I know you have to be careful on these subjects, but we see this new court filing Friday, and I always like to remind people this is not by Republicans, it's by the United States of America, because they've allowed Durham to continue his investigation. And he's relying more on this. It's an evidentiary filing, but on CIA analysis, that all of the idea that the Trump campaign had this server connected to a Russian bank and a Russian phone company, the CIA concluded was not technically plausible, and he's quoting them, did not withstand technical scrutiny, contained gaps, conflicted with itself, and then the kicker was user-created, not machine or tool generated. And they concluded this in early 2017. I guess the question is, Rick, I know the intelligence agencies have there are ways they can communicate and ways they can't. But the FBI, it looks like, didn't care that this was already determined to be totally false by 2017 and made up. They continued with Crossfire Hurricane. They continued with a special counsel. They continued with the Russia narrative.
So one of the things that I tried to point out as acting DNI consistently was that the dissenting voices on the Russian collusion hoax were silenced or classified away. It's one of the reasons why I went through and tried to declassify all of the testimony. It's why we tried to unredact the redacted sections of reports that showed that there were dissenting voices. And the key to this, Jordan, is this. The dissenting voices were always there from the very beginning. They were classified away. They were silenced. They were bullied. And so when you look at now all of this mounting evidence that Durham has to say, wow, we're finding that early on there were dissenting voices saying this is a phony file and a phony process. All of those people who were silenced away were also told by their superiors that we're going to continue doing this despite knowing that there are dissenting voices. And so what does that mean? It means that the CIA, FBI leadership knew and allowed this to happen.
Yeah, I mean, to me, that is so frustrating as someone who represented the president, because it whether you like it or not, I mean, he worked through it. But it certainly took his time. I mean, it took some of his time because you had Mueller and you have to do certain things with that. You have to talk to your lawyers. And I would always give the president this credit. He would try to always do it as late as possible in the day so that he was doing the people's business as much as possible. And so, we'd be working late at night with him on these issues. But it was additional items he had to deal with every single day. So when he called it a witch hunt, when he called it a hoax, and now we see it. Yeah, I mean, how many times have we seen, Rick, over and over, the Steele dossier, we've known that was completely fabricated. Now we know that they went so far as to fabricate like DNS tech data, and the CIA knew it, and the FBI either just ignored the CIA or, some people have called it with questions. I know there's issues with the CIA sharing information with the FBI. I mean, is that possibly an excuse for the FBI here?
No, let me be very clear that people knew that there were dissenting voices. And so the good news, I'm kind of a guy that likes to talk about the glass being half full. The good news is that the U.S. intelligence officers who are career people poked holes in this in the beginning and knew it was a sham. Okay, that's the good news. The bad news is that their bosses silenced them away, continued on with the investigation, and these individuals were bullied enough to where they weren't courageous enough to stand up and go public. Now, that's the bad news. And what we have to do is we have to be able to fix this system. I've said multiple times, I won't be happy unless Durham prosecutes senior DOJ, CIA, and FBI officials. They knew from the beginning. They saw the dissenting voices. They allowed all of this information to bubble up and even go to the FISA court. They continued the phony hoax, even though people below them knew that it was wrong, and they knew it was wrong.
I mean, it could have been done from the very beginning of the Trump presidency. It would have been a blip. It would have been Oppo research that was bad. Early February 2017, you figure all that out. President's inaugurated, he's in office, and you move on. But instead, it was the number one narrative on the president throughout his entire administration. Rick, talking politics a bit too, I wanted to get to a couple other things with you while we got you on the air today. First is a tweet you sent out on Iran. Our viewers, obviously, and ACLJ supporters, they care deeply about this issue of a nuclear Iran. And you said that anything with Iran is going to have to basically be it would basically be an executive order, because there's no treaty here unless there was some treaty adopted. It looks unlikely that this Congress would be able to do that. Explain your tweet, though, to folks out there, because you also said this is the problem with the European reliance on the administration right now.
Look, when you look at the Iran deal or the Paris Climate Accord, all of these issues, I said this as U.S. ambassador in Germany consistently. I told the Germans and the German people, you must insist that any administration, the Biden administration, the Trump administration, the Obama administration, you have to insist that these things become a treaty. We have a process in the United States that in order to make something permanent outside of just one administration, it needs to be a treaty. Therefore, it needs to go to the Senate for Senate approval. Now, you've got to give it to Barack Obama for having political calculus that was good and real, because he never sent the original Iran deal to the Senate because he knew it would fail if it went to the Senate. So therefore, it's an executive order. It's something that lives just during the Obama administration or the Biden administration. So we should be telling the Iranians, the Europeans, look, this is a deal that you cut with just Biden, and it's over when Biden is gone. The next administration doesn't have to honor it if it's not a treaty sent to the Senate, voted on by the Senate. The Biden team will not send this to the Senate because they also don't have the votes.
Yeah, I mean, and again, it's trying to get in for 3 years. It certainly seems muddled because of the Russian involvement in this process. But it's one you got to keep your eye on, because if you don't, you wake up one day and Jake Sullivan will be announcing that we're back into the 2 pages of bullet points that no one actually signed. And finally, Rick, we are in this, I think, important time. I'm speaking to a Republicans women's group tomorrow night, and a time when, people, depending on where you live, there's primaries going on, though. They're either happening very soon or at least by the end of the summer. And, one of the keys is we see these big articles, like even the New York Times by Democrat strategists, a Biden bloodbath, ? Now, I'm always careful this many months out to say, it's just a done deal. But I do think if there's good candidates in the Republican Party that are making the case to their constituents, whether it's at the congressional district level or the statewide level in the Senate, that there are going to be tremendous gains, but we still have to get the good candidates selected to make sure that's the case.
Yeah, for sure. And, when you look at the Trump endorsed candidates, or what we call America First candidates, they are people who really believe that Washington is broken and they want to have the outside mentality go. And there's a lot of these individuals who are new types of Republicans. They're not the typical Republican. First and second generation Americans are incredibly proud to be Republican, to be against the woke culture, because, Jordan, as you know, they left fascism. They know that America is great. And I think that's the key for Dr. Oz in Pennsylvania. Here's a first-generation American who loves this country, who became, wildly successful because of this country. And he's entering politics because he's watching this slip away. And he and Donald Trump see the world very clearly and very much alike when it comes to saying we can't let America slip away. We have to fight for America first, and this great idea of capitalism, the rule of law, all of the issues that make everybody else safe around the world.
And Rick, I'd say you can criticize every endorsement because you got to pick somebody at some point. What I think is cool with President Trump is that his endorsements show the idea of growing the party, that they're not all exactly the same, like cut out person. It's not the same. The women who are being endorsed, that they're not all the same. The men are not all the same. They come from different backgrounds. He's also very open to people who are totally outside of politics getting in, who might not have these perfect records because they're not lifelong politicians. So they don't really have records. It's more about get them in the process. We need some people who aren't just owned by the system, and that you can do that, and that he's not afraid of doing that as well.
And I would say that the theme that all of them have, the thing in common, is that they look at America and they say, this is the greatest country in the history of the world. We may not be perfect, but we're the best. Don't tear it down. Don't teach our kids to hate America. Let's fight back against the woke cancel culture. and let's defend America.
All right. As always, Rick, your information is great. I mean, to have you on a day where we've got all this intel coming out from CIA and the FBI in this court filing. Appreciate it. As always, Rick is our Senior Advisor for Foreign Policy and National Security.